There are really only a few things promised in life: taxes, death, and a brand new Amazing Spider-Man #1. That's right, the Amazing Spider-Man title returns with a brand new #1, making this the 7th volume and 7th time that the main title has renumbered. If you follow comics, you know this is kind of a norm, especially when it comes to the big two, DC and Marvel. Joe Kelly is now the main writer for the character, and if that sounds familiar, it is because Kelly has written for Spider-Man in the past, but this will be his first time as an actual main writer. But before we get to talking about this new volume and era for the webhead, let's take a trip down memory lane as we look at the history of Spider-Man #1s. Now I'm mainly going to be talking about the 7 Amazing Spider-Man titles, as when you're talking about Spider-Man #1s, technically there's too many to count. I will briefly touch on some secondary titles that are pretty impactful as Spider-Man #1s technically, and so much like anything, let's start at... Alright, so technically this isn't the beginning. In case you didn't know, Spider-Man's real debut is in Amazing Fantasy 15. Amazing Fantasy at the time being a failing and soon to be cancelled monster book, Stan Lee had the idea for Spider-Man, but didn't have much support from others, so Stan partnered with artist Steve Ditko through the character and the story in the last issue of this no longer popular comic series, with the twist being that fans actually loved this new character, and so boom, the webhead gets his own title with the Amazing Spider-Man #1. This #1 gives the reader a quick recap on Peter Parker and how he became Spider-Man. We also see Spidey save astronaut John Jameson, meet/battle the Fantastic Four, and tackle his first rogue in the Chameleon. For the start of the character's legacy, I think this is a perfect issue. It sets the standard for what Spider-Man comics are going to be, as Spider-Man is a character that has more than just his superhero challenges, but even as a superhero, he's not instantly loved. The theme of the public always being on the fence about him is established right away, and it's one of the things that makes the character so unique. And I love that the Chameleon is Spider-Man's first official rogue. It makes perfect sense that his first villain is a character that can disguise himself so well that he can trick people into thinking that he is Spider-Man, giving us another sensible way to believe that the public would be speculative of Spider-Man. Add some amazing artwork by Steve Ditko, which I have made a video on, by the way, and this is an iconic #1. A great start to a legendary character. Now, before we jump ahead almost 4 decades to the next volume and new #1, let's segue to 1976. Spider-Man's popularity was at an all-time high, and at the time, Stan Lee wanted Jerry Conway to come back to writing the character, but Conway didn't want to step on the toes of then-writer Len Wein, so they decided to come up with Spidey's second title, The Spectacular Spider-Man, aimed to focus more on the supporting cast as well as Peter's social life. This marks an important point for Spider-Man, as he has grown so successful he would warrant a second comic all to himself. And this would be a theme for the character, as in 1985, fans would get Web of Spider-Man, the 3rd official title for the webhead, but it would be in 1990 when Spider-Man would get his 4th official main title in Spider-Man, also referred to as Adjectiveless Spider-Man, that we would see one of the biggest artists, not just at the time, but of all time, tackle the character full on as the main writer, the main penciler. This #1 was so huge to Spidey's history, as it would not only be the highest selling Spider-Man comic, but one of the highest selling comics of all time, with 2.5 million copies printed/sold. Now, McFarlane's Spider-Man #1 is a great segue into the next actual volume of The Amazing Spider-Man, as during this era of the 90s, the speculation boom had occurred, leaving people to buy up new comic #1s, thinking it would pay off and make them rich in the future. So you fast forward, and one of the industry secrets to try and sell big and quick is by slapping a new #1 onto their comics. So after 40 years of this character's legacy already being established, Marvel would try to convince fans that this was a... After a messy mid-90s for the webhead with the Clone Saga, we get the 2nd volume in the character's history and a new Amazing Spider-Man #1, written by Howard Mackie and drawn by John Byrne. Now, when I talk about a messy mid-90s for the character, that's kind of an understatement. Not only did you have the infamous Clone Saga, but for the short time that the saga had ended and the new #1 volume had started, Spidey was still doing crossover arcs, meaning if you were picking up ASM at the time, for certain storylines, you'd also have to collect Spectacular Spider-Man and Adjectiveless Spider-Man, so on and so forth. Another industry secret to try to get fans to buy all the different comics for a certain character. Old readers had become exhausted and new readers had become overwhelmed. This new #1 was supposed to clean up all of the mess of the mid-90s and get fans on a new and easy track. So how does this new Spider-Man #1 go? Well, Peter Parker is not Spider-Man, and there's actually another person dressed up as Spider-Man fighting Spidey's rogues. And I know what you're asking yourself with the Clone Saga. Didn't we just go through this? Now, obviously, it wasn't the same as the Clone Saga, but it's clear that they still weren't letting go of certain themes from the messy 90s. And so the start of this volume is often forgotten, and a large reason is because only 30 issues in, the ASM title would receive a new writer in J. Michael Straczynski. And it would be in issue 30 that Spider-Man actually felt like it was getting a new volume / fresh start. It would be JMS's run during this era that would really be the highlight of this second volume. So it's safe to say that the first attempt of a relaunch and new #1 for the Amazing Spider-Man title was a bit underwhelming. So underwhelming that they wouldn't do another relaunch / #1 for another 15 years. And that's even with the character going through a pretty big change in status quo, with the era after JMS even being called Brand New Day. In those 15 years, we got a couple hundred more issues, and one of the biggest changes to the character would come in the anniversary issue 700, where a dying Doc Ock would swap bodies with our favorite webhead in order to become a superior Spider-Man. But that's a video for another day. So finally, in this third volume / new #1, Peter is back in control of his body, giving us the familiar Spider-Man we all know, but also, as this era is known, and the all-new Marvel Now initiative saw a ton of new relaunch #1s, and among them was, of course, the webhead himself. Seeing him come face to face with all the new things in his life, thanks to Doc Ock, this definitely doesn't feel as fresh of a start, but I do have to give praise to Slott because there's something that he's clearly leaning towards, and the way that he had set himself up with Superior Spider-Man into this run would lead us to one of the biggest changes and impacts in Spider-Man mythos, and that of course is the Spider-Verse. This volume would be significantly shorter than the previous two, with technically only 28 issues. A year later, we'd see the 4th volume of the new Amazing Spider-Man title, and once again, Dan Slott would be the main writer, taking Spider-Man out of the friendly neighborhood and giving us a... This new volume starts with Peter going full millionaire, as the success of Parker Industries allows him to help people all around the world, not just as Spider-Man, but as Peter Parker. There's great parallels to how Peter manages being a philanthropist compared to, say, a Tony Stark. And I love this because Slott shows that no matter how massive of a shift Peter Parker could have in his life, he remains the same grounded and empathetic character. This era / volume would sum up to 51 issues, ending with Legacy issue 801. Dan Slott would then step off of the title after over a decade of being one of the webhead's main writers. And with so much change in Spider-Man's life over the years, it felt like it was finally time to get back to the roots of the character. No more deals with the devil, body swaps, multiverses, million-dollar companies. At this point in the character's history, it felt like it was finally time to get... As the title of this first arc suggests, the webhead is back in his more traditional ways, really focusing on the friendly neighborhood in Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. Nick Spencer joined with Ryan Ottley, added a charm to the Amazing Spider-Man title that felt familiar yet fresh. Comedic and fun, this brought a ton of classic Spidey rogues while adding twists and turns that made it feel at times like the Ditko, Romita, and Lee days. Add the fact that MJ was now back in the mix as an actual love interest and they would work on their relationship together. Although fans wouldn't like it much towards the second half, the start of Nick Spencer's run had a lot of great momentum, definitely being one of the better #1s for new readers. I also just have to continue to add the fact that Ryan Ottley as the main artist for this new volume is such a treat and definitely the highlight overall. As mentioned, fans would grow tired of Spencer's run and Ottley would eventually leave as the main artist. Spencer would eventually leave the title himself as main writer, and then the last bit of this 106 issue issue volume, we get what is called the Beyond arc. This was very disliked by fans and had different writers going back and forth on the title, one of those writers being Zeb Wells. Yes, the same Zeb Wells that had previously worked on the character during the Brain Trust days, and the same Zeb Wells that would be the new main writer for Spidey's 6th new volume and new #1. In 2022, we would get what a lot of fans consider. This issue starts off hot. With an opening page of a beaten and distressed Spider-Man, we instantly get a 6-month time jump, and for the first quarter of this run, Wells would play up that grand mystery of what happened in that opening page. To say fans were upset at this era would be an understatement. In this first issue, Wells would seem to establish that this was going to be once again a grounded Spider-Man story, as the main baddie would be gang leader Tombstone, and what could be looked at as another back to basics run. Pieces of what the run would eventually turn into is what really made this an infamous era. Oh, and there's Paul, of course. People hate Paul. 72 issues in this volume, and fans would be flooding Spidey editorial for a change-up. But Marvel's Nick Lowe would simply argue that this era of Spider-Man was great, and that there was plenty of fans that are still buying and enjoying the book. Towards the end of this run, Wells would stop being the main writer at issue 60, and Marvel would get ready for yet another new volume and new #1. As mentioned, Joe Kelly would be the new main writer, but in between we would get the 8 Deaths of Spider-Man arc, which was kind of mixed for fans, and you would think that after such a controversial run that we just went through, and in general, Spider-Man fans really feeling that over the decades we haven't gotten what we want, that we would take a stance and not rally around another #1 until editorial met our demands. But alas, we would prove too loyal to our favorite character and be ready for a new #1 in hopes that it could be a better Spider-Man run overall. With hope in our hearts, just like Spider-Man in many of his battles, we decided it was finally time to... Now, it's too early to say what's going to happen in this run and what Kelly can do to overall win the fans back. But it does seem like more people are more receptive to this new direction, and once again, it sort of feels like that back to basics narrative. There's definitely some potential, as it's starting off a lot less inconspicuous as the last run with Wells. On top of that, we're very close to the legacy issue 1000, so I wouldn't be surprised if this is the volume that we get it. And whether fans are going to be happy or upset about the title, it will nonetheless feel great to see the iconic character we all love join other great company with such a massive milestone. Overall, you can't satisfy everybody, so it will be interesting to see how this next era goes. I guess at the end of it all, as long as we have Ultimate Spider-Man by Jonathan Hickman, we are somehow getting fed. But what did you guys think of the new Spider-Man era / volume? Also, what did you think of this history and walk down of every Spider-Man #1? Would you want to see it with other characters and titles? What is your favorite Spider-Man #1? Let me know down below in the comments. And once again, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe for more.